India 1950s style, a complete take of the E.M. Forster Passage to India, but mine was 1950s style. This is purely a personal account of how I went to India in the 1950s, and I stayed there for 15 years. I met my husband PK. His full name was Pradut Kumar, whilst he was studying for a degree in metallurgy in Sheffield University. He never minded being called PK. His full name was a bit of a mouthful. He said all the best people, JFK, FDR, HRH. I think you get the idea anyway. He never minded it. Mixed race marriages were not unknown in the 1950s, but they were unusual, and none of my friends were very enthusiastic about the idea. So, anticipating that the other side of the world, they would have similar objections to a marriage of this kind, PK went ahead of me to sort out his lot. Within a year, a telegram arrived saying wedding arranged for August the 3rd, and a letter followed telling me to go down to the P&O officers in Tilbury and collect my tickets for a sea passage to India. Well, I said my goodbyes and I went down to Tilbury. I entered the P&O office, and as a 20-year-old, and there were two gentlemen who must have been maybe about 40, but to a 20-year-old they seemed quite grizzled to me and quite daunting, because they put me through a kind of inquisition. Where was I going? Who was meeting me? What money did I have? Where was I going to live? And why was I going in the first place? And after that, they handed me the telephone and they said, would I like to speak to my mother? I said no, I've already said my goodbyes, and with that, they handed over the tickets, which they should have done in the first place because they were paid for. Looking back on that incident, I was looking at them as two grizzled old men at 40. They must have been looking at me as a green 20-year-old travelling out east, where it was unusual to travel abroad after the war. And probably it was a last-ditch attempt to save me from being trafficked to some elderly sheikh. And that's the kindest interpretation I could put on that. So here we are. As you can see, it's not the Titanic. It was indeed a cargo ship. But I was going in the opposite direction to the Titanic anyway, so and the place I was going, no fear of icebergs anyway. I was the only passenger, I was the only female on board, which had its advantages because I dined every evening with the captain and the senior members of the crew, and when the captain went ashore to meet the agent in Malta and in Aden, he took me with him, and of course there was always a slap-up meal provided on those occasions. I had a very nice cabin also, on deck, very airy. So off we went down the Suez Canal, and I often wonder, was I one of the last tourists to go through the Suez Canal before it was nationalized by Colonel Abdul Nasser? Was I one of the last people to have a swim in the Sweetwater Canal? Who knows? But I often look back on that and wonder. That's my first sight of India, the gateway of India. And there was a family welcoming committee on the jetty below. PK was there, his older brother and his younger sister. And immediately I was whisked off to his older sister, who was called Lily, his older sister's apartment. She lived in Bombay because we're on our way to Calcutta, but she lived in Bombay because she was married to a naval officer. And of course, the first thing they wanted to see was what I looked like in a sari. And I was dressed in silk red georgette to have a tour of Bombay. Now, bear in mind, we're in the 1950s. I had passed the whole war in school uniform because everything we bought was on coupons. You had no question of having a party frock or a best frock. That's the way it was. So going around Bombay in silk red georgette, it was like a ball gown, and it wasn't long before I put my foot through the hem of the sari and it tore. Came back, changed, put my foot through the hem of the second one, and in the end, Lily said, "Put your frock back on." But I gave myself applause because I did eventually learn to wear the sari very elegantly. I could climb ladders in a sari now, I could do any kind of DIY, but at that point in time, I was a bit clumsy. College-going girls in Calcutta now, they don't usually wear the sari. They wear jeans and tops, which is a much more sensible outfit for getting around. But there's no doubt the sari looks very elegant when you wear it properly. I didn't let the slide down, girls. So here we are in Bombay, and just find my little arrow to enlarge where we are. That's Bombay on the west coast, and we have to travel the width of India, west to east, to arrive in Calcutta. That's a journey of 1,500 miles as the crow flies. It's 2 nights in a sleeper compartment. It wasn't air conditioned, it was a steam engine. And it passes through 6 states. It just flicks through them, waiting at 2 minutes, that's all. And one big junction, probably at Nagpur, which is in the middle of the Deccan, it stops for 20 minutes. I don't know why, I wasn't inquiring at that time, but looking back on it, probably stopped to take on water or deliver the post or whatever it was. Destination, before we move on to destination Howrah, there were a few surprises there because it wasn't air conditioned. We travelled with the windows open all the way in a steam engine. You can imagine what state we arrived in. And also the toilets were a bit of a shock. They were the squatting kind with 2 placements for the feet. But when you're young, you get used to a lot of things, don't you? You compromise. Destination Howrah. This is one of the 2 main railway stations in Calcutta. If there's any similarities with St Pancras strike you, that's not surprising because they were built by the same people in the same era and for the same purpose. The station platform. All stations have drama by nature of what goes on. Emotional hellos and goodbyes, and of course we've all seen Brief Encounter and Shed a Tear. In England's turnover, it's probably too cold to hang around, but in India, the railway stations, it looks as if the world and his wife is there, and they're there for the duration. At this end, you've got somebody having a haircut. At that end, you've got somebody cleaning his teeth. He's obviously been on the station platform all night and cleaning his teeth. In the middle, you've got an elderly gentleman that's brought his servant along, oiled his back, and is giving him a nice massage. And the village women that have travelled waiting for connections, maybe to meet their relatives further north, they travel with bundles on their head, and they are busy tying and untying these bundles as they hand out clean clothes to the children that are running around. So we made for the taxi rank outside. All those yellow taxis are a direct copy of the Morris Oxford. So that's a little connection, isn't it, with this part of the world. They're very sturdy for bouncing along the country roads in India. You can more or less lift the bonnet up and repair them with sealing wax and string. What a joy. Calcutta holds on to them. Bombay has dispensed with these taxis altogether, but they're still in service in Calcutta. And our journey was to take us over Howrah Bridge, which is a bridge that spans the Hooghly River, which is a big river, and it meets the even mightier Ganges in the Bay of Bengal, our destination. The destination was a house in the suburbs. I didn't know where we were going. I knew we were going to have a roof over our heads, but nobody told me the details. It was rented accommodation. And it appears that my father-in-law, future father-in-law, had retired as printing superintendent of the Eastern Railways. And rather than take his pension in monthly instalments, he had commuted it to a lump sum with which he meant to build his own house. Amongst the huge welcoming crowds, everybody wanted to see what this young woman was that had come out to marry PK. And after some time, I could sort out which were the family members, 8 of them, and I thought, father-in-law retired, expenses therefore were alarming because the expense would fall on PK to support the family. And PK still had not got a job. Was I welcome? Well, I heard afterwards that when the family and friends heard that I was coming out to marry PK, they all came forward with loads of free information to my father-in-law. She'll never settle here. They've ruled here for 200 years. She'll be off. Secondly, Western woman. Married today, divorced tomorrow. Well, they got that wrong, didn't they? Because before PK died, we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. She doesn't know the language. What's she going to do? Well, they got that wrong also, because I did eventually learn to speak Bengali. So my father-in-law listened to all this, and in the end, he said enough. This wedding is going to take place, and anybody who doesn't like the idea need never darken my doors again, or words to that effect. So the wedding, this is not my wedding. This is the full-blown 3-day marathon that is an Indian wedding. And I mean 3 days, morning to night, morning to night, morning to night. Mine was a 1-day Hindu ceremony, shortcut affair. And I hesitate to show the miserable little black and white snap that I've got of the wedding, but of course I've got to show it to you. This is us. There's the priest on the extreme right-hand side, and he is intoning everything in Sanskrit, which is a much more sonorous language than Latin even. It goes om, jom, like this. Although this was a shortcut affair, it had the core elements of the 3-day marathon wedding, in that you are starving from early morning until all the ceremonies are finished in the evening. August must be one of the worst months in the Indian calendar, and I'm sitting there dripping with sweat and dripping with gold ornaments, any one of which I would have exchanged for a bacon sandwich. And of course I acquired a mother-in-law. Now, she never took a very good photograph, but she was indeed a very nice lady. She was the only one in the family that she probably understood English, but she certainly didn't speak it. My hair caused some concern to her. She had seen pictures of me as a brunette with shoulder-length hair, acceptable. Before I left England, I thought, let me smarten myself up. And I had the latest haircut, which was politely known as the DA cut, and impolitely known as the duck's arse cut, because it cuts it very short and comes to a pleat at the back. Well, during the sea voyage, the sun and the salt air had dried it out, and I arrived with sticking out spruts. My mother-in-law must have been mortified, and she told the renter crowd that was watching the wedding proceedings that I looked like that because I had just recovered from a bout of typhoid. I'm not quite sure what the connection is, but presumably you have high temperatures when you've got typhoid, and cutting the hair sort of releases the heat that's going on. And she promptly covered my head with a red veil, and really, you can't blame her. That's a picture of me the day after the wedding, and you can see what happened to the hair. can see why I would have sent me home. And PK did get a job, a very prestigious job. But like all prestigious jobs, it was the prestige, it wasn't the money, but there was money coming in. It was a job with the Ford Foundation of America and the Indian government combined. So there was money coming in, at least to the house. And father-in-law's house went up brick by brick. Notice the health and safety ladder. It's still standing today, in case you were. I think at that stage, I can't remember, but they must have been putting the roof on because they're all travelling with cement on the bowls on their head, you know, and going up the ladder and piling it on up there. There was a short religious ceremony, and we moved in, a family of 8, a maidservant, a cook, and a gopher, as one that goes for things, a gopher. Right. When I moved in, it was a single-storey house. This is what it looks like today. It was a single-storey house then, with no houses either side. The plot was bought and the area developed very much like a new town, like Milton Keynes. People bought plots, built houses. So we were the only ones there until the neighbours came either side, cutting off your light. New things, when I moved in, they were careful of my health. I had to take the TABC injection, which is typhoid type A and B, and the C is for cholera. And the smallpox inoculation, which is a little wheel that scratches your arm, because smallpox wasn't eradicated from the world until the 1980s. Another new thing in the house, we didn't have a 24-hour water supply. The municipality gave you a couple of hours in the morning, and depending on how they felt, 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon. If you couldn't afford a pump to pump it up to a tank on the roof, then you had to store it in a concrete basin downstairs. Well, at that point in time, we couldn't afford that. So running water took on a new meaning there, because when you went into the bathroom and had a bath, you called for the gopher, and he came running with 2 buckets of water. There was no town gas, and I think there is still no town gas in Calcutta. So if you could afford it, you used bottle gas, the same as rural people do here. Again, we could not afford bottle gas, so we started out cooking on an unan, or a chula, which you probably recognize as a clay oven. It looks pretty primitive, but on the other hand, it is fit for purpose, and it also is safe, because it holds the Indian pots, which have got round bottoms. They don't topple off. I forgot to tell you, after the wedding, by the way, we went and registered that in the municipality. So after the ceremony, that's where we went. You'd probably like to know a take on how things work in India. There's no ombudsman to settle any kind of dispute you have with your neighbour or anybody. I've put this picture taken from the roof because you can look down here on the next picture, which is the house opposite to us, and it's got a blue door, blue garage door. Unfortunately, that garage door was a magnet for any workmen in the area and any servants that were going to bazaar. They used to stop and use it as a toilet. If we were on the roof and we yelled at them, that was disgusting, move on. Downstairs at the gate, even closer, we could yell at them and say, you know, buzz off, that's awful. Nobody took a blind bit of notice. So PK had the brilliant idea of cutting the picture of out of a magazine of a goddess. And he pasted it on the garage door, and ever after that, people passed reverently. So this was my opportunity, first experience of what a housewife's duties are in India. I had nothing to do in the household, so observation was the thing. It's the same the world over, the cooking, the cleaning, and the kids. And the only difference is that you have to manage servants in India, which can be a help or they can be a headache if you don't train them properly. They're hard work. So job number one is the daily bazaar. I was actually thrilled to go to the bazaar because wartime Britain, if you joined a queue and you found at the end of it they were serving bananas and oranges, you were turned away unless you were pregnant. Whereas in the market here, there's oranges, there's mangoes, there's bananas by the boatload. So it was quite exciting for me to go and see all the wonderful fresh vegetables which are brought in on the back of a lorry from the outside suburbs where they're growing. Usually the servant does the marketing. That includes the fish marketing. A very noisy place. Bengalis are devoted to fish. It's served almost every day of the week and maybe meat at the weekends. And the fish market, very noisy, because unless the fish is actually alive and flapping, everybody's arguing, turning back the gills to see whether they're red or they're pink, how fresh they are. And the fish seller, again, he's sitting with an instrument that looks fairly primitive. It's a knife that's curved and sitting in front of him, but totally fit for purpose. If you pick up the fish, you can drag it along the blade to get rid of the scales. You can off with the head, off with the tail, and then cut it to how your buyer wants it, thickness. You can even fillet it on that machine. And the next thing you have to sort out as a housewife is your washerman, that you choose somebody that washes in a clean pond. There's many a time I have seen my mother-in-law after the marketing. We finished our dinner and she's been sitting at the dining table and she's been calling for the gopher who's done the marketing. She's got her little notebook there and she's taking the details, what she gave him, what he bought, how much he bought it for, and she's taking the change off him. So that was a daily thing that I saw my mother-in-law do. So we fixed up the Dobie. You have to list the outgoing and check it back in again. 10 bed sheets, 2 pillow covers, 6 shirts, whatever. And then when the Dobie brings it back, check it off again, 10 bed sheets, 6 shirts. Dobies in India are 90% illiterate, but it's amazing that what you give them usually comes back, despite the workload that they've got. They have a series of indelible dots, which I never went to interpret, but we always got our things that we gave back again. That's the workload in saris, and there we go with a bit more workload. And it comes back beautifully ironed. I'm sure plenty of people have seen. I've only seen one of these irons in Chirk Castle, where I sometimes volunteer. It's a Victorian iron with the coals in the receptacle underneath, and of course the flat iron is heated on it. And when the shirts come back to you, they're just as when you bought them, beautifully ironed. You can just slot them back in your cupboard. Housewife's duties again, the onset of winter. You've put all your duvets, they call them lapes in India, you put all the duvets away for the summer. So come the winter, you call this fellow here, and he travels with bags of cotton, raw cotton on his shoulder in a gunny bag. I don't know whether you can see it. If I enlarge this part of it, it's we've gone wrong out here, haven't we? Yeah, and we've gone wrong again. Yes, it's like a musical instrument. Can you see the string that goes from one end to the other? And he's taking those cotton balls out of his bag, and it makes a twanging sound as he beats them and fluffs them up. And then he spreads the cloth on the ground and distributes the cotton and sews it by hand, and then beats it with a bamboo stick. I think you probably see some in the background there, some bamboo sticks, just to even out the distribution. And then he sews it all by hand, and you end up with a duvet that is stitched in the pattern of our old eiderdowns that we used to use, stitching around the edge and a circle and a flower in the middle. So that's the end result. And then business at the door for the housewife. Nobody throws the newspapers away in India. There's somebody comes round and buys them by the kilo, and that creates a kind of cottage industry. They take those newspapers to the refugee colony. 6 million refugees came over the border from Bangladesh at the time of the Pakistani war, when they had a war with the northern part of Pakistan. 6 million came, so there's plenty of refugees settled and working away. One of their jobs was to make little paper bags of those newspapers and then sell them on to the corner shop, the equivalent of the corner shop, and they would hold pulses, sugar, tea, any dry goods like that. So India, in a way, was the original recycler saving the planet. I said servants are hard work. Servant health is your health. If there's anything wrong with a servant, you have to pay for them to consult the doctor. Morals have to be policed also. We had a permanent cook, but he had a small holding of his own. And once a year, he used to go back to his village to bring in the harvest, the paddy. And when he went away, we had to engage somebody temporarily. Well, this particular time, a young man who thought he was a Don Juan, and he was romancing one of the maidservants up on the roof. Well, we didn't know how far it had gone, but he had to be dismissed because he was a married man anyway. And of course, unionization, which quite rightly is coming in with servants now in India, because they are or have been exploited. So you have to have negotiating skills to deal with them. One servant in particular I have to mention. And that's Badhu, who was a Nepali. He came from the foothills of the Himalayas. He was in the family long before I got there. He wasn't taken for his cleanliness. If you lived in the foothills of the Himalayas and had to bathe in icy water coming down from the glaciers, I don't think you'd be keen on taking a bath either. And there's many a time I've seen my mother-in-law get hold of him by the ear and drag him outside to make him take a bath. But Badhu had all the characteristics of people that come from hill areas, in that, when I say simpler, I don't mean they were wanting. They were less sophisticated. They were totally honest. They were absolutely faithful and completely obedient. And for those reasons, Badhu was kept in the family. Unfortunately, Badhu caught leprosy, and he had to be dismissed, but he was given money to attend a clinic, and he used to come every day with his own plate, and he would sit in the driveway of the house, and he would get the same lunch that we had had during the day. He came regularly for some time, and then one day he disappeared. He didn't say he was going, but we understood that he probably had a, you can recover from leprosy, or it can burn itself out. And we don't think he died. He probably went back to his own village in Nepal. What was there to do in Calcutta? Have I got any Germans in the audience before I say what I'm going to say? Well, you know that you've heard it before, that if two Englishmen get together, they form a club. Right? Two Germans get together, they start a war. Two Frenchmen get together, well, use your imagination. And it was certainly true in Calcutta that the expat British people, there were loads of clubs, and I'm just showing a couple of them. That was the swimming club. Have I got any golfers in the audience? This is the Royal Calcutta Golf Club, which is the oldest in the world next to St Andrews. Strangely enough, after independence, 14 years after independence, those clubs operated a kind of apartheid in which they didn't welcome Indian members. But this particular club, the Calcutta Club, was created to admit all and foster relations between the two cultures. Club life was expensive. By that time we had bought a car. And our weekend occupation, taking the in-laws, everybody, was to have picnics, home-cooked food, put it in the boot, go to a place like the Victoria Memorial, which is bang slap in the middle of Calcutta. You can see it's got water, cool water, tree shade, sit down and just hang out for the Sunday. And then we thought we would see how the poorer people lived, what was the simple life in the villages, how patronizing were we. We took the picnic to one of these outlying villages where the pond is the villagers' means of washing, cooking and all the rest of it. Well, not cooking because they usually have a stand pump. And we spread the blanket. We were just about to take the food out of the boot of the car when somebody noticed that there were lots of holes underneath the blanket. And of course they were snake holes, so hastily rolled up with the blanket, everything back in the boot, and we didn't try that again. So on the basis of what was there to do in Calcutta, this was the road into the shopping in the centre of Calcutta. I've put this next slide up, not to make fun of the Calcutta traffic police, but I couldn't resist it because dogs do run around in India, and this one's obviously got a prime spot. As I say, not to make fun of the traffic police, because that's what it's like. Pretty chaotic, and they manage it quite well. And you're going here into a Newmarket to do your shopping. Newmarket is like designed on the design of a wheel, with a central hub from which radiate different aisles, all selling different things. There's an area that sells curios, an area that sells cloth. And the legend is that if you have the money, you can buy anything in Newmarket, from a tiger's eye to knicker elastic. I mention knicker elastic because obviously the shop owners stand outside their shops and they try to entice you in. And as soon as they see a Mem Sahib, the call goes out, Mem Sahib, come inside, strong knicker elastic, come inside. Well, I can only think that that dates back to when our grandmothers were out there and they wore those direct-to-our knickers that needed a lot of elastic. They must have thought we were still wearing them. If you wanted to see an elephant in Calcutta, you had to go to the zoo. North India, South India, you will see plenty of elephants. Calcutta Zoo, you can see she's got a chain round one of her legs, and she was chained up for part of the day to a concrete slab with a strong metal attachment to that. But for the rest of the day, Full Mala, her name means garland of flowers, Full Mala was engaged with a howdah on her head, and the mahout would sit on her head. You could pay to have a seat there and be taken round the zoo compound. Well, we were supposed to be going a particular Thursday to the zoo, but for some reason it was cancelled. And we read in the paper the following day that Full Mala had gone mad. She had plucked the mahout from the top of her head, she'd trampled him to death, and then she'd gone berserk, running around the zoo compound until the zoo manager had to come out with his gun and shoot her. Another elephant came to our front door. Sometimes they're very smart cookies that sit on top of the elephants. And when he saw the interest that he created outside our front door, he demanded money, which we gave him, but it wasn't enough. Demanded more, and we said, on your way, you've had enough. And with that, he prodded the elephant, put the trunk on the top rung of our front gate, and gave it a slight tug, so we capitulated and gave him more money. Sometimes it's good to capitulate. Up till this time, I had absolutely nothing to do with the running of the house. household. My mother-in-law did it all, thank God, if we would have been bankrupt, I suppose. She knew how to manage things. At this point in time, my father-in-law had a stroke, and he was paralyzed down one side. He lost the power of speech, but not his mental capacity. So, because I had nothing to do, I was designated to look after him for a couple of hours in the morning. And these were my 3 jobs. I had to read in the newspaper. It was English newspaper. A pretty good standard. It was edited by Malcolm Muggeridge at one time. And after that, one hand on my shoulder and his stick in the other hand, he would walk round the house that he had built, and God help the gopher if he found any cobwebs, because he would be called with his long brush to get rid of them. He was a very particular gentleman, my father-in-law. Everything had to be spick and span. There was a polished, the end of his staircase was a polished cement ball, which was his pride and joy, and if there were any fingerprints on that, that had to be polished also. And then he went outside, and he would look at his favourite bush, which was a jatadari bush, and you had to pull off all the dry tassels, bring them inside and put them in bin. Right. So those were my jobs until I had my first adventurous baby. Or should I say, misadventurous. The routine in the household was, after lunch, people would put their feet up. And I don't mean just rest in a chair, it was the full Monty. Into the bedroom, off with the bed covers, down with the mosquito net, close the shutters, dead to the world for 2 hours. Well, I could never get used to that. I used to find myself something to do. So this particular day, at this point in time, by the way, I was rather a large lady, 7 months pregnant. I decided to, I wrote a letter home, and I decided to go to the post office myself to post it. It was only round the corner and up the road. Of course, complete quiet still. Everybody's doing the same thing, dead to the world. There were 2 dogs that were having their siesta under the shade of a garage. And when they saw my sari swishing round my ankles, one of them darted out and took a nip of my ankle. He didn't bite, but he did draw blood. So when I went back home, because we couldn't identify the dog, the only precaution you can take against rabies is to have 14 injections in the stomach wall. So we sent for the medicine, which was kept from the Tropical School of Medicine. That was kept in the fridge, and for 14 days, every day, I had somewhere out here an injection in the stomach wall. You don't have antenatal care, or didn't have at that time, as you have in England. But I was put under the care of the leading gynecologist in Calcutta. Unfortunately, he was such a big shot that he never came out to you. You had to go to his chamber to be examined. And come the final checkup, it was in October, and the monsoon is finished. But the floods which follow the monsoon are still around. And in front of his chambers was 3 feet of water. Well, the taxi refused to go. I couldn't walk there. Sometimes they pull up the manhole covers and you could disappear down one of those forever. It was dangerous. So our only option was to arrive elegantly by hand-drawn rickshaw, which PK would never normally use. He said it was demeaning for one man to pull another in a rickshaw. If ever we went by rickshaw, we always had a cycle rickshaw. Anyway, elegant arrival for the final checkup, and things worked out all right. Elegant arrival of son number 1 in Presidency General Hospital, cabin number 1, and suitably enough, cabin number 2, the elegant arrival of son number 2. So, and then PK got a new job as chief metallurgist of Braithwaite and Company. At that time, the parent company was in Birmingham, and we moved out of the family home into a new lifestyle altogether. This was our bungalow, which was opposite the Ganges or the Hooghly. We were on the top, in the top floor of this building. You can see the length of the veranda. That's where my children learn their cricket, one batting from one end and the other one bowling with a rolled up ball of silver paper from the other end. And very good cricketers they turned out to be. Why Angus? It was called Angus because Braithwaite and Company rented part of their buildings, their compound, and the main owner was a jute mill company from Dundee, which is in County Angus, and of course they called it Angus. In the next slide you can see looking down, the green arrow points to where the jute mill officers lived. That's where the jute came down from East Bengal, which is the best jute in the world, the golden fibre they call it. And of course the factories are outside the compound. So we're looking down there. The blue covering on the roof is where the swimming pool was. Beyond that there were tennis courts and playgrounds for the children. And our own company provided a 9-hole golf course. You went round twice, of course, but for 18. Very well patronised. I would say it was a precious thing for all the expat companies there, because it was patronised by Dunlops up the river, by Exide batteries across the river from us, by a Trevenny paper mill that was run by a man, Mr. Broadbent from Fleetwood, and particularly across the river from us was the British Army at Barrackpore, and they were there because they flew regularly up to Nepal to recruit to Kathmandu to recruit Nepali boys as Gurkhas for the Indian Army. So Major Houston and Major Estridge were also great supporters of the club. You can tell how it was valued. That was the prize day, and every one of those cups is solid silver. There were cinemas in Calcutta, and we didn't have to live without cinemas when we moved 20 miles upriver. Although it was basically a village, our own companies showed films. Sometimes Braithwaite's was quite disastrous because people brought their kids along that should have been in bed ages ago, and they ran around while you were trying to figure out a Hitchcock plot. But whatever, the main cinema was the Udayan, and during the week that showed those Bollywood all singing, all dancing things, but on a Saturday night it always showed an English film. So we all piled in the car and we used to go on a Saturday night. We were usually the only occupants of the balcony, best seats in the house, VIPs. And in front of the balcony was a very thick, it must have been an electric wire which stretched from wall to wall. And as soon as the main music for the feature started, out would come this rat and tightrope along this wall. I'm not kidding. As soon as it heard, it went along the wire. Sometimes more interesting the film, but we've never forgotten the Udayan rat. This is just another picture of the house, the river that it overlooked. The house faced the river Hooghly. It's a pity this slide is not in colour, because it would show the typical maroon coloured polished cement floors, and they were kept that way by washing them twice a day with kerosene in the water, and that kept down the dust and the ant colonies that wanted to come wherever they were not wanted. But the biggest bonus for my children was that they got 2 new playmates. And if I can enlarge this, the I is for Ingrid and the S is for Sheila. Sheila and Ingrid were respectively 3 months older than mine, so they started their their education together, their primary education, in St. Joseph's Convent up the road. Ingrid and Sheila were the daughters of the manager of Lagan Jute Company, and that was the parent office in Belfast. They used to make the actual machinery that wove the jute. They all started primary school together. So here we are again with the same ones with doubtful halos. Sheila in the top left-hand corner, my two, and Ingrid with the dirty knees there. They all finished their education together. Ingrid did medicine at Newcastle University. My two did civil engineering, and Ingrid did history at Newcastle University. And they remained friends for life, and they still attend each other's significant birthdays, weddings, funerals, all the rest of it, which is rather lovely. And I was telling your organizer, Sheila is now a retired GP, the little one in the top left-hand corner, and she's going to India in December to meet up with her Chandanagar primary school friends who've kept together as a gang. So I'm going with her in December. That's what I was mentioning to you, Pauline. I say they remain friends together, but when the boys reached age 7, the nuns kicked out all the boys. They only made it a girls' school. I don't think they could cope with boys. And mine went to Don Bosco, which was a little train journey away. It was an English medium school run by the Christian Brothers. And I've put this picture up of their sports day because I taught there for 6 very strange months. When I was there, the Indian Army was in occupation. There had been a political movement in North Bengal called Naxal, because it originated in a place called Naxalbari. They were called Naxalites, and they were revolting against, quite rightly, against their position as peasants of a feudal landlord. You would have every sympathy with that, but the movement was communist, it was violent, Maoist, and unfortunately that spread to the cities where they were supporting the peasants. Spread to the cities, and university students were burning trams. It became quite violent. And when I was in the school, the army was there to vet the 6th form students to see what their political leanings were, and they actually closed the chemistry labs for 2 or 3 days in case they were used for bomb making. Well, finally, we always took our holidays in the hills. I suppose many of you have seen the BBC documentary on the blue train that goes up to Darjeeling. We took our holidays up there every time we had a holiday. We never went anywhere else. There's no tunnelling going up to 10,000 feet. It takes 7 hours for the train to go round and round. I'm tempted to go round and round. It goes round and round the hills, no tunnelling. So it takes 7 hours to get up there. And at its last turn, you get the full panorama of the Kanchenjunga range, now at 10,000 feet, and then it drops down to Darjeeling at 8,000 feet. Now the Himalayas is a great arc of mountains that stretches from east to west for 150 miles. And within that arc, there are different names for the ranges, and the Kanchenjunga range is the one that dominates Darjeeling wherever you go. Our connection to that, if you like, is, has anybody heard of Joe Brown, who lives in North Wales? He's a mountaineer, and he was the first one to climb Kanchenjunga, which is over 23,000 feet. He's climbed most of the peaks in the Himalayas, but he was the first to climb Kanchenjunga. The whole landscape is shared by Bhutan, China, India, and Nepal. And you can see everywhere you go in Darjeeling, you get that panorama. And if you see the actual diagram, you can see Darjeeling towering in the left-hand corner there, and those peaks dominating your view of wherever you go in Darjeeling, which is quite magnificent. I've seen the Alps. We love the mountains, and we used to go to Switzerland quite when we returned to England quite often. But nothing actually beats the majesty of those mountains, which are so high. So, out and about in Darjeeling, these are just pictures there. Brings all the majesty to a human level, because that's what we did. Went to tea gardens, went to see the piggery there, which supplies all the bacon to Calcutta and everything. And that's just about a very brief overview of the 15 years that I spent in India. Anybody has any questions?
When you came back, how did you adjust?
Well,
That's a whole nother story.
it is a whole other story, you're quite right. But the point is, we landed on my mother. We actually came with the Indian government put a restriction on taking currency out. And the only thing we could bring was £75 with 2 teenage children and us. I mean, the English government also put restraints on taking currency abroad, you know, as they do occasionally. So we came with, and besides which, my husband had left his provident fund in a bank for the parents to draw on the interest for their living expenses. So we landed on my mother, who at that time was running a rest home in Blackpool. So there were plenty of bedrooms. I think she must have thrown everybody out and put us in. And it only took a month for PK to find a job with Rolls-Royce. At that time it was Parsons, then it became Siemens, now it's Rolls-Royce, because they make turbine blades for the any engines that you've got. So once he got a job, I think you can say when you're young, and by young I mean I was what, 39 then? You're still at the age when you can adjust, and that's what happened. Had it been older, it would have been more difficult. So, yes?
Did your mother-in-law and father-in-law ever come to England?
My mother-in-law came, but my father-in-law had died before that. He lived for 15 years actually after his stroke, lived very happily in the family home, because in India, you know, elderly people are kept. And to be fair, I mean, everybody says, oh, how we ignore our old people here. But to be fair, in India, you can engage ayahs at a very low rate, which does all the hard work of running after elderly people when they're incontinent or whatever it is. So they've got the company of the family, and they've got their personal needs taken care of. So what was the question you asked?
Did they ever come to England?
Pardon?
Did they ever come to England?
Yes, my mother-in-law came. She didn't intend to, but Lily in Bombay was very much a get-up-and-go sort of person. And my mother-in-law visited Bombay, and because Lily's daughter worked for Air India, they quickly got tickets, and she said, you're going to see PK. And she came with no luggage or anything, you know, just like that. We took her to Blackpool, we took her to Durham Cathedral. We pushed her around in a wheelchair. And the first thing she said when she entered the house was, it should have been him that came here. She was thinking of her husband, that he was an Anglophile, and he would have been very happy to have visited.
It's just interesting, you said that you were trying to
Yes.
You were 12 months. Did you have to wait 12 months for them to arrange your ticket?
To what?
To go out to India in the very beginning?
Yes, it must have been My husband worked in Germany, then he worked in Sweden for a while, and then he went back to India with the understanding that I would follow him. So I've actually forgotten what the period was. It was within a year anyway. Yes, within a year.
You're very brave and
Trust.
yeah, it's brilliant.
Oh, let us pass backwards and
Yes,
forwards.
yes.
Well, India is really in fashion at the moment, so thank you very much for being on the trend. Yes, we got that real Marigold Hotel program. And we're back to hospital in India as well. And last night I actually saw a film called The Lion about a little boy lost in
Oh, that is very good film, I believe. It's Dave Patel is
as one of our members had for ages to set off from England, age 20 to India. Maybe the first time he'd ever been abroad.
No, I had done the typical backpacking thing to the continent with 3 other girls. So I had been abroad, but not like that.
And then to have the courage to attend a different culture and take it on, and looking at the humour. I knew there was humour there in Yorkshire. And you've seen it in everything in India that you did. Of course, India leaves a mark with us anyway. We have it in our language, don't we? We have pyjamas, bungalow, jodhpurs,
Aji Baji, which is talking nonsense. Blighty, which is the word for England, yes. Blight.
blighty.
Yeah, blight. They call England blight. And that's
It's a corruption
of the lighting. Yeah.
You see, it's all there. It's amazing.
It's all army slang, isn't it?
Yeah. And I knew it would all come out. Thank you so much for bringing it to us. And
Pleasure.
thank you.